The air in the staff room was thick with the scent of stale coffee and unearned confidence. Sunlight, usually a kind thing, seemed to sharpen the cruel edges of the laughter, and the laughter was always directed at him. He was Mr. Elias Thorne, the new history teacher, or as they, the established, tenured, and impeccably dressed faculty, called him the substitute with a degree. His suit wasn't new. It carried the faint, honest odor of a life lived working, not networking. It was charcoal grey, worn smooth at the elbows, a silent testament to struggle. Elias stood by the cheap coffee machine, holding a chipped porcelain mug. He wasn't doing anything, and that was the problem. His silence was interpreted as meekness, his lack of flashy watch as poverty, and his gentle eyes as a lack of backbone. Mrs. Veronica Hayes, the art history teacher who spoke 3 languages but possessed the kindness of none, was holding court. She was discussing the school's disastrous new budget proposal, a complex financial mess that had puzzled the administration for weeks. "Honestly, the numbers just don't add up," Veronica declared, waving a slender hand dismissively. Her colleagues murmured agreement, shaking their expensive heads. She paused dramatically, her eyes landing on Elias, a fleeting moment of pure, patronizing amusement. "I mean, perhaps our newest, most frugal member here has a suggestion. Perhaps a former substitute has a revolutionary, cost-effective idea for a multi-million-dollar institution." The laughter that followed was a practiced, synchronized wave of mockery. It wasn't loud, but it was cutting, a privileged whisper of contempt. Elias looked down at his mug. A slight frown, so brief it could be missed, tightened the corner of his mouth. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even lift his gaze. He simply spoke into the mug, his voice a low, steady rumble, like distant thunder. "The $400,000 variance in the maintenance and infrastructure line item isn't an error." The laughter died instantly. Veronica's polished smile froze. "It's a miscategorization," Elias continued, still looking down, his tone purely factual, like reading a weather report. "The new fiber optic installation was improperly coded as a recurring expense rather than a capital investment. By adjusting that single metric, the budget is not only balanced, but you gain a $100,000 surplus for the fine arts program." Silence. The kind of heavy, suffocating silence that follows a truth nobody wanted to hear. Veronica blinked, her face shifting from smugness to a wounded, aggressive disbelief. "That's absurd, Mr. Thorne. I have the official report right here. You're a history teacher. What do you know about complex school finance?" Elias finally raised his head. His eyes, the color of a winter sea, met hers. He held the gaze for a second that felt like an hour. "I know what I see," he replied simply. And then he turned his back on the stunned faculty, took a small, careful sip of his bad coffee, and walked toward his classroom. He left behind a room full of people whose pride had just been quietly, surgically dismantled. My value was never determined by their acceptance. Their judgment was a reflection of their small world, not my true size. As Elias walked down the long, empty corridor, the air felt colder, but cleaner. He could still feel the heat of their eyes on his back, the confusion, the irritation, the nascent flicker of fear. He had revealed a small piece of his hidden depth, and it had destabilized their comfortable hierarchy. He reached his classroom door, room 101, and paused. He saw his reflection in the polished brass door handle. A man of humble means, currently paid less than the school's gardener, yet carrying the knowledge that could run the entire institution. He reached inside his breast pocket and gently touched a heavily folded piece of paper, an official letter he had received 3 days ago. He had memorized every word, every signature. It was the reason he was here, enduring this subtle, daily crucifixion. It wasn't just a job application he had submitted months ago. It was a formal invitation to reclaim what was his. He didn't open the door yet. He closed his eyes, taking a deep, calming breath. They laughed at the teacher. They dismissed the man. But destiny, my friends, is never dismissed. The universe was about to prove that a man's true wealth is not measured by the depth of his pockets, but the height of his integrity. And for those who believed they were above him, a reckoning was coming. Before we continue into the heart of this dramatic turn, comment here your city and country. I want to know how far this story is reaching. The environment of Northwood Academy was a monument to wealth, a world where the air smelled of expensive cleaning products and the silent arrogance of generations of success. The campus wasn't merely a school, it was an exclusive club designed to keep the outside world out. Elias walked the marble floors that truly did echo like judgment, just as the narrator observed. Every step he took seemed to amplify the difference between him and everyone else. The students, clad in crisp, tailor-made uniforms, treated him with a polite but pervasive indifference. The staff, meanwhile, viewed him as an unfortunate accessory, a required piece of educational furniture that was quickly wearing out its usefulness. He saw the contrast everywhere. The faculty lounge featured imported leather sofas and a fully stocked espresso bar, which ironically he never used, preferring his chipped mug. The student parking lot glittered with German and Italian engineering, vehicles that cost more than Elias's entire accrued salary. He noticed a brand-new, metallic blue sports car parked carelessly across two designated faculty spots. The owner, likely the son or daughter of a major donor, untouchable and unchallenged. Elias simply tried to do the right thing. He spent his breaks reviewing lesson plans, meticulously researching historical events, not just for factual accuracy, but for the moral and human lessons they offered. He treated the janitorial staff, the real invisible backbone of the school, with genuine respect, often pausing to ask Manuel, the head custodian, how his daughter's university application was progressing. Elias's biggest struggle wasn't the workload, it was the persistent feeling of being unseen. One afternoon, he was moving a stack of heavy, outdated history textbooks from a basement storage room up 3 flights of stairs to his classroom. The books were dusty, the boxes weak, and he moved slowly, deliberately. As he reached the second-floor landing, Mr. Julian Vance, the head of the English department, a man whose entire personality was built on the foundation of his prestigious academic pedigree, came marching down the hall, deep in an animated phone call about his weekend sailing trip. Julian was talking loudly about wind speeds and nautical terms he probably didn't fully understand, trying to impress the person on the other end. Elias, struggling with the precarious stack of boxes, pressed himself against the wall to give Julian ample space. Julian, without breaking stride or acknowledging Elias's presence, walked straight past him. Worse, his elbow brushed against one of the boxes, causing it to slip slightly. Elias steadied the load, dust swirling up from the deteriorating cardboard. Julian didn't stop. He didn't flinch. He didn't even drop the nautical terminology. It was the purest form of contempt, the total absence of recognition. I realized then that they didn't just disagree with my ideas. They didn't even register my existence. To them, I was just a piece of the wall, a smudge of dirt that would be cleaned up later. Elias continued his slow ascent. The books felt heavier now, not just physically, but symbolically. They represented the weight of the work he had to do, the worth he possessed, and the sheer effort required to exist in a space that actively tried to erase him. When he finally reached room 101, he collapsed the boxes onto the worn wooden floor. He sat down heavily on a desk chair, wiping sweat from his brow. He saw a postcard tucked into one of the books, a faded, sepia-toned image of a grand university campus, the kind of place that cost a lifetime of savings to attend. A former student, perhaps, who had managed to escape this gilded cage. Elias smiled faintly, a private moment of triumph. He wasn't born rich. His background was simple, built on hard work and intellectual curiosity, not inherited fortunes. He carried something no money could buy, conscience. And that conscience, that unwavering inner compass, was his true strength. They had the polished marble. I had the solid foundation. They had the loud talk. I had the quiet truth. I was an honest man trying to do good in a cold system, and I knew that sometimes the coldest systems are the ones most desperate for a single spark of warmth to break them. He wasn't born rich, but he carried something no money could buy: conscience. The next morning brought a fresh crisis to Northwood. The school's advanced computing lab, essential for the seniors preparing their final dissertations, had suffered a catastrophic network failure. The specialized server, which ran their proprietary research software, was down. Panic was spreading among the seniors, and the technology department head, Mr. Owen Kincaid, was visibly sweating, pacing the hall outside the sealed lab. Owen was a man who relied on technical jargon to mask his actual lack of deep knowledge. He had called 3 different external contractors, all of whom gave contradictory, expensive and time-consuming diagnoses. The consensus: a minimum of 48 hours to restore the server, paralyzing a crucial final week of student work. Julian Vance, the English head, and Veronica Hayes were hovering, not helping, but loudly criticizing Owen's handling of the crisis. Their concern was purely self-serving. The failure reflected poorly on the school's image, and thus, on them. "This is unacceptable, Owen," Veronica sneered, adjusting her silk scarf. "Do you realize the tuition fees these parents pay? We can't tell them we lost a week of research because of a glitch." Elias, passing by on his way to his history class, paused. He stood silently for a moment, observing the blinking red lights on the server rack visible through the lab's glass partition. He didn't interrupt the frantic conversation. Owen, in a moment of utter desperation, finally noticed Elias standing there, an outlier in the chaotic scene. He spoke with barely concealed contempt. "Anything to contribute, Thorne? Perhaps the ancient Greeks had a solution for a corrupted raid array?" Elias didn't take the bait. He simply pointed to the server rack. "The failure isn't in the raid array, Mr. Kincaid. The thermal exchange unit is clogged. The server is throttling its processing power to prevent a meltdown, which is causing the software to lock up." Silence fell again. Owen scoffed. "Impossible. We have a maintenance contract." "The maintenance contract only covers software updates, not physical dust filters," Elias said calmly. "It's a 2-minute fix, but the system must be powered down first." Julian Vance stepped forward, aggressive skepticism etched on his face. "Are you serious? You expect us to trust a substitute history teacher with our core infrastructure? This is a liability, Thorne. Stick to the Battle of Gettysburg." Elias ignored Julian, looking directly at Owen. "I can fix it in 10 minutes. Or you can wait 48 hours for a contractor to charge the school $5,000 to do the same thing." Owen hesitated, defeated by his own incompetence and the ticking clock. He unlocked the lab door, stepping back reluctantly. "Fine. But if you break anything, it's coming out of your next 5 paychecks." Elias nodded once, accepting the terms without comment. He walked into the lab, his simple grey suit contrasting sharply with the flashing lights of the expensive machinery. He didn't consult a manual. He didn't ask for tools. He merely retrieved a small, specialized lint-free cloth from his briefcase, the kind a professional technician would carry. He powered down the server safely, opened the side panel, quickly located the clogged filter, cleaned it with practiced, efficient movements, and re-secured the panel. 10 minutes later, the main server lights turned from an angry red back to a steady, calm green. The system booted up perfectly. Elias straightened up, brushing invisible dust from his jacket. "Try the research application now," he instructed quietly. Owen Kincaid, mouth slightly ajar, rushed to a workstation and logged in. The proprietary software, minutes ago frozen, opened instantly and ran flawlessly. A small crowd of senior students who had gathered outside let out a collective, audible sigh of relief. "How? How did you know that?" Julian demanded, his voice thin with humiliation. Elias was already halfway out the door, walking toward his scheduled class. He paused and looked over his shoulder, giving them one of his rare, faint smiles. "I teach history, Mr. Vance," he said. "History is about recognizing patterns. Thermal dynamics, financial statements, or human behavior, the patterns are always the same." And with that he was gone. No applause, no credit, no thank you. The others stood in stunned, resentful silence. They had witnessed a pure, undeniable display of competence from the man they dismissed, but their pride would not allow them to acknowledge it. While others mocked, he fixed what everyone else broke. The silence was his only applause. Humility, they believed, was a sign of weakness. They were wrong. Humility, when paired with competence, is simply strength disarmed, waiting for the right moment to strike. Elias Thorne's classroom, room 101, was a stark contrast to the opulence of the rest of Northwood Academy. It was organized, yes, but sparse. The walls were covered not with expensive digital displays, but with maps yellowed by time and hand-drawn timelines meticulously labeled. It was a place focused on learning, not showing off. Late that afternoon, after all the students had left, Elias was organizing a collection of old historical artifacts, replicas of coins and documents used for teaching. He sat at his desk, bathed in the soft, fading light of the setting sun filtering through the window. He reached into his pocket, not for the folded letter, but for a different object, a heavy antique key. It was brass, intricately carved, too large for any modern lock, and held on a simple leather cord. He took it out and laid it on the worn wood of his desk. He traced the complex pattern of the key's teeth with his thumb, his gaze distant, lost in memory. Every single one of them here at Northwood thought they knew what success looked like. They saw the price tag, they saw the title, they saw the car. But true value, true influence, it often prefers to remain hidden, like the root system of a 1,000-year-old tree. The key wasn't the only ghost of his past. He opened his briefcase, the one Julian Vance thought was cheap and worn, and carefully pulled out a photograph. It was old. The colors faded to a nostalgic blur, showing a much younger Elias, maybe 20 years ago. In the photo, Elias was standing in front of an immense, beautiful building, a classical structure with Greek columns and a towering dome. It looked remarkably like an older, grander version of the very building Northwood Academy was trying to emulate. He was wearing an expensive tailored suit, not the one he wore now, and shaking hands with an elderly, distinguished gentleman. Both men were smiling, a genuine, powerful smile of shared accomplishment. Written in elegant script on the back of the photo were 2 names and a single date. The second name, the distinguished gentleman, was Dr. Malcolm Ashford, the legendary, now deceased founder of the very educational philosophy Northwood Academy claimed to uphold. The first name was simply Elias. He kept the photograph out for only a moment, his eyes lingering on the image of the younger man, a man brimming with energy, authority, and the kind of visionary passion that builds empires. He quickly put the photo away, tucking it back into a hidden, zippered compartment inside the lining of the briefcase. A low knock came at the door, startling Elias. It was Manuel, the head custodian, pushing his cleaning cart. Manuel was the only person at the school, besides Elias, who truly saw the building as something more than a workplace. They both saw it as a responsibility. Manuel glanced at the key and the briefcase, and then his eyes met Elias's. There was a look in Manuel's eye that wasn't curiosity or pity, but knowing recognition. Manuel didn't ask about the key. He didn't ask about the photo. He simply paused his cart, leaned in slightly, and spoke in a quiet, confidential Spanish. Mi jefe, ese edificio no es tan grande como su historia, y su historia siempre espera. My boss, that building is not as grand as your history, and your history always waits. Elias understood. He didn't just understand the Spanish, he understood the meaning. Manuel knew that Elias was carrying a secret, a destiny that was temporarily on hold. Elias gave Manuel a knowing smile, the first truly relaxed smile he'd shown at Northwood. He touched the old key on his chain, the only thing left from the life they took away. It wasn't just a key. It was the physical representation of the power he had once wielded, the legacy he was tied to. The staff laughed at him, the poor teacher. They didn't know he wasn't just teaching history. He was, in fact, the history of this very system. The mystery was now planted. The audience, like Manuel, felt the weight of the unknown, the powerful truth that was just beginning to surface. They needed to know what life was taken away and what power that key represented. The ultimate stage for Northwood's social hierarchy was the annual Founders' Day luncheon. It was a mandatory event for all faculty, but for the senior staff and the board members, it was a showcase, a chance to rub shoulders with the wealthiest families who funded the institution. For Elias, it was simply mandatory attendance, a painful reminder of his current station. The luncheon was held in the grand, high-ceiling ballroom. The air shimmered with the scent of expensive perfume and the clinking of crystal glasses. Elias sat at the furthest table, designated for support staff and adjuncts, near the swinging doors of the kitchen, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. He was wearing his best, meticulously pressed grey suit, which looked hopelessly humble next to the bespoke Italian tailoring of Julian Vance and Owen Kincaid. The head of school, Dr. Eleanor Albright, a woman whose smile was as practiced as her political maneuvering, was giving her address. She spoke glowingly of the Academy's heritage, its vision, and its valued faculty, her eyes carefully sweeping over the tables, pointedly skipping the one where Elias sat. Julian Vance, emboldened by the presence of his high society friends and perhaps a glass of high-end Chardonnay, decided this was the perfect moment to deliver the finishing blow to Elias's dignity. Dr. Albright opened the floor for a brief Q&A, a formality rarely taken up by the donors, but often by the faculty looking to score points. Julian stood up immediately, his voice booming with fake concern. "Dr. Albright, I have a question regarding the integrity of our academic staffing. We all strive for excellence, but there has been some unconventional hiring this year. Specifically, I'm concerned about the standard of our substitutes, particularly in the core subjects." Everyone understood the target instantly. Heads turned toward Elias's corner table. "I understand budget constraints are tight," Julian continued, dripping sarcasm. "But allowing a teacher who seems more adept at janitorial maintenance than historical analysis to handle our seniors seems reckless. We rely on experts, not men of all trades." A few chuckles rippled through the main faculty tables, including a loud, triumphant snicker from Veronica Hayes. Julian had successfully painted Elias as a handyman in a suit, a man whose single moment of technical competence in Block 03 had been twisted into a punchline about his lack of academic pedigree. Elias felt the heat rising in the room, but his face remained a mask of profound internal stillness. He kept his hands clasped on the table, not showing a single twitch of distress. The laughter echoed again, but this time it didn't reach him, because the truth never laughs. The truth was in his heart, a deep, solid stone of certainty that their opinion meant absolutely nothing. Their mockery was merely the sound of their own fear, amplified. Dr. Albright, sensing the cruelty of the moment, looked uncomfortable, but was forced to address the comment. She prepared a bland, diplomatic response about diverse hiring pools. Before she could speak, Elias slowly pushed his chair back and stood up. He did it with such quiet, deliberate composure that the entire room, drawn by the stark contrast of his humble figure against the gilded background, went silent. He didn't look at Julian. He looked past him, towards the donors and the history that lined the ballroom walls. "Dr. Albright, if I may," Elias said, his voice quiet, clear, and carrying an unexpected weight of authority. "Mr. Vance is correct. I am merely a substitute. I have no prestigious title here. But I have two things I believe are of value to this institution." He paused, allowing the intense silence to build. The donors were now leaning forward, intrigued by the unassuming man who dared to challenge the established order. "First," Elias continued, "is the truth. Mr. Vance's concern is not for academic integrity, but for social hierarchy. He fears a man who knows his trade is more dangerous than a man who only knows his title." A powerful gasp went through the room. Elias had just diagnosed the entire school's disease in a single sentence. Julian's face flushed a deep, unhealthy red, his smugness dissolving into pure rage. "And the second thing?" Elias asked rhetorically, his eyes sweeping over the silent, stunned faculty. "The second thing is a question. This institution was founded on the principle that merit should transcend money. If a man, regardless of his title, can solve a problem that paralyzes your operations and save you thousands in the process, as I did yesterday with the server, does his true value not exceed the salary listed on his contract?" He didn't wait for an answer. He picked up his napkin, placed it neatly on the table, and without another word, he walked out of the ballroom. He didn't rush. His walk was slow, measured, and profoundly dignified. He left behind a silence heavier than any applause. He had been publicly humiliated, yes, but by maintaining his calm dignity, he had turned the humiliation back onto the aggressor. That was the invisible turn. The moment destiny began to move rapidly in his favor. The moment was a public declaration. They thought he was small, but he had just proven he was too big for their room. The humiliation was complete, but the moral victory belonged entirely to the man in the worn suit. The destiny he carried was now officially activated. The quiet, dignified exit from the founders' luncheon did not go unpunished. Julian Vance, utterly livid and wounded by the public spotlight Elias had turned onto his arrogance, demanded swift and punitive action. Dr. Albright, prioritizing the fragile egos of her senior staff over a temporary teacher, complied immediately. That same afternoon, Elias was called into Dr. Albright's vast, oak-paneled office. The atmosphere was cold, formal, and utterly devoid of empathy. "Doctor." Albright sat behind a desk that could serve as a small aircraft carrier, her expression one of regretful severity, a performance she had perfected over years of managing conflict. "Mr. Thorne, this is deeply regrettable," she began, the words sounding hollow in the cavernous room. "While we appreciate your technical insights, your conduct at the luncheon was unprofessional and disruptive. You directly challenged a head of department in front of major donors. That is an unforgivable breach of protocol." Elias stood before the desk, his hands relaxed at his sides. He knew this was coming. He had orchestrated this very outcome. He had pushed them until they reacted exactly as their pride dictated. "My conduct was a defense of my professional integrity, Doctor," Elias stated, his voice even. I spoke the truth about the imbalance and the hypocrisy within this school's walls. Dr. Albright sighed, her performance escalating to theatrical exhaustion. The truth is often inconvenient, Mr. Thorne, but so is insubordination. I'm afraid your temporary contract is terminated, effective immediately. Your services are no longer required at Northwood Academy. She pushed a standard thin envelope across the desk, his final paycheck and a terse, impersonal termination notice. It was his official expulsion from their ivory tower. The moment had come. He was walking away with nothing, except everything they'd forgotten, his worth. They thought they were punishing him. They were merely releasing him to fulfill his true potential. Elias took the envelope. He did not look at the check. He did not sign anything. He simply nodded once, accepting the piece of paper that formally declared him a failure in their eyes. As he turned to leave, Dr. Albright delivered her final petty blow, laced with false pity. I sincerely hope you find a place where your unique talents are better appreciated, Mr. Thorne. Perhaps something less academic, more focused on the practical arts. The implication was clear. Go back to manual labor. You don't belong here. Elias paused at the doorway. He looked back at Dr. Albright, his eyes deep and reflective, carrying a sadness that had nothing to do with his termination and everything to do with her blindness. Doctor, he said, the respect in his voice completely genuine, but cutting nonetheless. I already found that place, and I built it. This temporary placement was merely research. He left the statement hanging in the air, a cryptic, deeply unsettling clue that Dr. Albright immediately dismissed as the bitter ramblings of a scorned man. But the words were true, and their quiet power was meant for the audience, not for her. He walked out of the office, down the long corridor that led to the faculty exit. The building, so grand and imposing, now felt like a sterile cage. Outside, the late afternoon sky was heavy and bruised, matching the mood of the fall. Elias walked to his old, well-maintained economy sedan, a vehicle that was the physical antithesis of the luxury cars parked nearby. He sat in the driver's seat for a full 5 minutes, not moving, not turning the key. He didn't cry or rage or even express regret. His pain was quieter, deeper, the pain of witnessing the corruption of a noble institution. He pulled the heavy brass key from his pocket and held it tightly. It felt cold against his palm, yet grounding. The key was the link to his true identity, the purpose that now called him back. I lost a battle, but I secured the war. They had taken my temporary job, but they had not touched my soul. They had thrown me out, but they had merely opened the door to my return. He started the car. As he drove away from the opulent gates of Northwood Academy, he looked back at the imposing facade for a final time. The building was beautiful, but its heart was sick. Sometimes justice walks slower than pride, but it never stops. The system had cast him out, believing they were safe. But Elias knew the truth. He wasn't leaving the game. He was simply changing his uniform. The reckoning had been promised, and the moment he crossed the school line, the mechanism of ultimate justice was set irreversibly in motion. He left not in defeat, but in final, calm preparation for the monumental task ahead. Elias Thorne didn't drive toward despair. He drove toward destiny. His car finally pulled up to a modest but meticulously maintained brick building in an older, revitalized part of the city. Not a grand institution, but a small, vibrant, non-profit education center called the Beacon Initiative. The interior was warm, filled with natural light, and buzzing with the focused energy of young students from underserved communities, students who Northwood Academy would never even glance at. Elias was greeted not with formal titles, but with genuine smiles and hugs. This was his true work. This was the place he had found and built. He walked into a small, functional office. On the wall hung dozens of framed certificates, awards, and commendations, not for teaching history, but for educational administration and systems reform. One large, glossy certificate bore the inscription, Founding Director, the Beacon Initiative. He built again, not to prove them wrong, but to prove himself right. This was his sanctuary, a testament to the idea that true education required heart, not just high tuition. The light changed completely here. The visual tone shifted from the cold blue and grey of Northwood to warm golds and soft browns. The soundscape moved from the sharp, echoing clatter of marble to the gentle hum of focused work and quiet, encouraging conversation. For the next few weeks, Elias threw himself completely into the Beacon. He wasn't just the director, he was the primary teacher, the technical support, and the fundraiser. He was everything Northwood mocked him for being, a man of all trades. But here, those skills were celebrated as vital competence. He taught a small class on civic history, relating the lessons of the past to the future the students could build. He fixed a temperamental 3D printer for the engineering club. He wrote grants late into the night, channeling the financial acumen he had used to expose Northwood's budget flaw into securing funds for his own deserving students. One evening, he was working late at a simple wooden desk, reviewing a detailed proposal. The proposal wasn't for Beacon. It was addressed to the Northwood Academy Board of Governors. It was not a request. It was a comprehensive, legally binding operational plan. He picked up the heavy brass key, the key he always carried, and used its intricate head to smooth out the creases in the document. I had to leave their fortress to remember why I needed to return. Northwood was broken not by finance, but by leadership. It had forgotten its mission. I had endured the insult of the substitute teacher to gather the evidence required for a legitimate, moral, and total takeover. Elias had not been randomly applying for a substitute position. He had been quietly monitoring Northwood Academy's internal workings for over a year. Why? Because the Dr. Malcolm Ashford in the faded photograph from Block 04 was not only a founder of a new educational philosophy, he was Elias Thorne's mentor and, more importantly, his late father-in-law. The heavily folded letter Elias carried was not a job offer. It was the result of a legal battle. A court order confirming that Elias's wife, who had tragically passed away 3 years prior, was the majority shareholder in the original family-founded Ashford Educational Trust. The trust that still legally owned the Northwood Academy campus and held the deciding vote on the Board of Governors. The legal complexity was immense, but the truth was simple. Elias Thorne was the executor of the majority ownership of Northwood Academy. The substitute job had been a strategic move, a way to gain unparalleled, uncensored inside access to the financial rot, the toxic culture, and the systemic mismanagement under Dr. Albright and the senior staff. He needed proof that the current administration was fundamentally failing the institution's charter. He finished reviewing the proposal. It was a plan to dismiss the entire current administration, reallocate funds based on true academic need, and restore the school's moral compass. It was titled, The Restoration of Northwood Academy. He looked at the key, the master key to the original Ashford Trust Vault, the vault containing the final, decisive documents. The light changed. Colors warm, music soft, tone of a determined, inevitable recommitment. Hope was not a gentle emotion now. It was a hardened resolve. He was not looking for forgiveness. He was seeking justice for the students, the founders, and the memory of his wife. He was about to return to the cold marble, not as the victim, but as the unavoidable righteous judge. One brisk Monday morning, just 4 weeks after Elias's expulsion, an emergency meeting was called for the Northwood Academy Board of Governors. The air was charged with confusion and resentment. The senior staff, Dr. Albright, Julian Vance, Veronica Hayes, and Owen Kincaid, were all present. their faces tight with nervous anticipation. They had been told only that a major shareholder action was imminent. The vast boardroom, a circle of power and prestige, was cold and intimidating. Dr. Albright, still radiating confident authority, began the meeting, attempting to assert control. I apologize for the short notice. As you know, the Ashford Trust has long been a quiet, passive partner, but their legal counsel has requested this special session. I assure you, whatever the concern, the administration is fully capable of handling it. The main door to the boardroom opened, and a figure walked in, accompanied by two impeccably dressed corporate attorneys. It wasn't a lawyer who walked to the head of the long mahogany table. It was Elias Thorne. Julian Vance choked on a nervous swallow. Veronica Hayes's perfectly composed expression shattered into pure, horrified disbelief. Dr. Albright's jaw went slack. The effect was immediate, total and visceral. The same people who mocked him now stood in line for his approval. Elias was no longer wearing the faded grey suit. He was wearing a dark, custom-tailored suit that fit him like a second skin, reflecting the seriousness of his purpose. He carried a heavy leather portfolio and possessed an aura of quiet, unassailable power that made the entire room shrink. Elias walked to the central seat at the table, the seat traditionally reserved for the board chair, and deliberately placed his brass key on the polished wood. The sound was a sharp, final clack. He didn't sit immediately. He looked down the table at the faces of the people who had ridiculed him. "Good morning," Elias said, his voice calm, steady, and amplified by the room's acoustics. "My name is Elias Thorne. For the last 4 weeks, I was the substitute history teacher in room 101. Before that, I was the executor of the late Victoria Thorne's estate, and as of this morning, I am invoking the terms of the Ashford Trust and the governing charter." He nodded to his lead attorney, who distributed copies of the legal documents, pages detailing stock ownership, founding mandates, and an immediate injunction. Elias finally took his seat, the position of ultimate authority. He looked directly at Dr. Albright, whose face was now a sickly shade of white. "Dr. Albright, you stated that you appreciated my technical insights. Allow me to offer one final one. The Ashford Trust holds a 51% ownership stake in Northwood Academy. By law, that grants the executor, myself, the full authority to appoint and dismiss the head of school, the senior administrative staff, and the board of governors." He paused, letting the magnitude of the truth land like a physical blow. The silence was absolute. "I didn't come back for revenge," Elias stated, his voice softening yet gaining a chilling power. "I came back for justice, for the institution my father-in-law founded, and for the students whose education you compromised in the name of your own vanity and status." He opened his portfolio, pulling out a meticulously documented binder. "My time here as a substitute was necessary to gather irrefutable, first-hand evidence," Elias explained. "I witnessed toxic budgetary mismanagement. The $400,000 fraud, Mr. Kincaid, Mr. Vance, and Ms. Hayes attempted to overlook. I observed the pervasive culture of intellectual snobbery and apathy led by the senior staff, who prioritized humiliation over integrity." He turned to Dr. Albright. "Doctor, your termination of my contract was based on insubordination. I now terminate yours based on documented moral and financial negligence." He then looked at Julian Vance and Veronica Hayes. "Your appointments are also terminated. Your value was measured not by your educational impact, but by your ability to dismiss and disrespect those you perceived as beneath you. That toxic pattern ends today." The scene was calm, devastating, and entirely without shouting. It was not vengeance. It was the clinical execution of justice. He was not angry, he was disappointed, and his disappointment was their ruin. The moment was emotional and calm, without shrieks, just the undeniable force of moral justice. The humiliation was not repaid with humiliation, but with the quiet, overwhelming authority of a man who was always the owner, simply waiting for the right time to reveal the key. The boardroom was a tableau of defeated pride. Dr. Albright, Julian Vance, and Veronica Hayes sat stunned, their careers, their entire identities, crushed not by rage, but by the quiet efficiency of the man they dismissed as a failure. Owen Kincaid, the technology head, looked vaguely terrified, sweating profusely. Elias had executed the full change of administration. The two corporate attorneys were already finalizing the transition, their briefcases filled with termination papers and non-disclosure agreements. The school's crisis was over, replaced by a sudden jarring change of command. Elias now stood at the head of the table, overlooking the vanquished staff. This was the moment of ultimate power, the moment they expected the full, personal retribution. Julian Vance finally found his voice, a pathetic, wavering sound. "Elias, Mr. Thorne, please. This is too harsh. We didn't know. We only assumed. You were a temporary hire. Can't we discuss this? I apologize for my remarks at the luncheon." Elias looked at Julian, his gaze calm, steady, and utterly non-judgmental. There was no flicker of triumph in his eyes, only a profound sense of closure. "Mr. Vance, I don't need your apology," Elias stated. "And no, we cannot discuss this. My decision to remove the entire senior staff is final and necessary to cleanse the culture of this institution. It is not about personal revenge. It is about institutional integrity." He paused, leaning slightly on the table, speaking less as a CEO and more as a teacher, delivering a final, vital lesson. "I could prosecute each of you for the financial negligence I uncovered. I could expose the detailed reports of your systemic cruelty toward other, less privileged employees. I could take everything you have," Elias said, his voice lowering to an almost intimate level. "But I won't." He looked at them, allowing the relief to slowly dawn on their faces. He didn't need revenge. The truth had already done it. The ultimate punishment was not what Elias would do to them, but what the truth had revealed about them, a moral hollowness that no wealth or title could ever fill. "You will be given severance packages as defined by your contracts," Elias announced. "Your departures will be listed as administrative restructuring. You will leave this school quietly and with your professional reputations intact. I don't need to crush you to win. Your own actions already created the consequences." He was granting them mercy, not because they deserved it, but because he deserved to remain the better man. He was proving that the victory of character is far greater than the pleasure of vengeance. He then looked at Owen Kincaid, the one man who had been genuinely incompetent, but perhaps less maliciously cruel than the others. "Mr. Kincaid, you lack technical depth, but you have loyalty," Elias stated. "You are not dismissed, but you are demoted. You will report directly to the new head of technology, focusing purely on infrastructure, not administration. You have a chance to learn and redeem your professional failures. Don't waste it." Elias turned away from the vanquished staff, addressing the board members who were still sitting in stunned silence. "I am officially assuming the role of interim principal and director of the Ashford Trust," he declared. "My first directive is to immediately reallocate the $400,000 we recovered from the maintenance variance directly into a new faculty merit and scholarship fund, effective today. Northwood Academy will immediately begin recruiting based on teaching excellence and character, not on social connections or wealth." He walked toward the large windows, looking out over the sprawling, beautiful campus. He was no longer the invisible substitute teacher. He was the ethical cornerstone of the institution. He had won the ultimate victory, not by becoming the aggressor, but by refusing to lose his moral compass. He won with silence and humanity. The villains saw the face of the man they had scorned, and they realized that their greatest loss was not their jobs, but the chance to have learned from a man who embodied true worth. The hero didn't seek their fear or respect. He sought the peace of knowing he had restored justice to a corrupt system. His triumph was complete and absolute. Weeks later, the dust had settled. Elias Thorne, now the official principal and director of the Ashford Trust, was back in room 101, his old classroom, but the room was different. It was cleaner, brighter, and the maps were updated. He wasn't teaching history this semester. He had personally hired a brilliant, empathetic young teacher to take the class. Elias was sitting at the same worn wooden desk, not reviewing budgets, but lesson plans for the new Ethics in Leadership course he was implementing. The room was quiet, peaceful. The heavy brass key, the key of ownership and trust, now sat permanently on a small marble pedestal on his desk, a constant, silent reminder of his true purpose. The school was already transforming. The atmosphere was lighter. The new faculty, hired on merit, brought a renewed energy. Even the student body seemed to carry themselves with a little more purpose, sensing the shift from privilege to principle. I didn't need their applause. I didn't need their recognition. What I needed was to fix the broken promise of this institution. I needed to know that the man they scorned was the one who could finally bring true worth back to its halls. Elias looked out the window. He saw the new head of technology, a young, brilliant woman from his Beacon initiative, working with the students, her passion infectious. He saw Julian Vance's old parking spot now occupied by the school's first scholarship recipient, a young man from the city who had earned his place through sheer grit. He smiled, a deep, genuine smile of fulfillment. His revenge was not their downfall, but the restoration of what was right. The true victory was not becoming the principal. The true victory was remaining the Elias Thorne who taught in the worn grey suit. He had navigated the cruel world of entitlement and power without sacrificing his empathy, his honesty, or his humility. They once confused simplicity with simple-mindedness, and they mistook kindness for weakness. They learned the hard way that the deepest currents flow quietly. He picked up a simple fountain pen, a gift from his late wife, Victoria, and signed the final paperwork establishing the Victoria Thorne Merit Scholarship. He ensured that no student would ever again be judged solely on their parents' bank balance. In the end, he didn't need their applause, because real triumph is knowing you stayed kind in a cruel world. The power had changed hands, but the soul of the leader remained untainted. Elias stood up and walked to the door of room 101. He paused, turning off the light, plunging the room into the soft, settling dusk. The darkness was not frightening, it was serene. He stepped out into the quiet hall, now the leader of the entire academy, but feeling as humble as the day he arrived. He had achieved everything: justice for the institution, honor for his wife's legacy, and proof of his own unwavering worth. The greatest lesson I learned at Northwood was this: title is fleeting, money is temporary. But character, the quiet, uncompromising commitment to doing what is right, is the only currency that lasts. It is the only true power. The victory I achieved was not about winning against others. It was about not losing the man I knew I was meant to be. Every soul has worth, even when the world forgets. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to remember that value isn't found in what you have, but in what you are.